welcome to a very special cover story conversation. We have with us Manish Tiwari. He is the Congress MP from Anandpur Sahib. He is also the former Union Minister for Information and Broadcasting and a national spokesperson for the Congress Party. Manish, welcome to this conversation. And first of all, I'd like to begin by asking you about the Agniveer scheme, because that's really something the buzz at the moment. And some of your comments seem to indicate that you are at variance with your party's line.
Well, thank you very much, Priya, for having me on your show. It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with you, one of the rare quiet conversations left in the television universe. You see, what one needs to keep in mind is how the current structure of the Indian armed forces evolved and how this new paradigm called Agnipath or Agniveer, frankly, it's a very dramatic nomenclature for my taste, is really going to impact the future trajectory of the Indian armed forces. So you need to really rewind back into history. You see, when the British started occupying India, they had primarily three armies: a Bengal army, a Bombay army, and a Madras army. And the recruits in this army were essentially upper caste Hindus. Then, when the 1857 First War of Independence happened and the sepoys of the Bengal army, led by Mangal Pandey, revolted in Meerut, the British, of course, came down with a very heavy hand, and a large number of Indian feudals actually sided with the British, and the First War of Independence didn't end well. But that completely and absolutely unnerved the British. And so, therefore, they decided to bring about a fundamental shift in their recruitment paradigms. In 1859, they put the Jonathan Peel Commission into place. Now, this commission identified 16 castes who they thought had been friendly to them in the First War of Independence or the revolt. And most of them were located in North India. They dubbed them as martial castes and started recruiting essentially from these castes. So between 1870 and 1945, that is the end of the Second World War, there was very heavy recruitment from Delhi all the way up till the Khyber Pass, what in Pakistan is called the Punjabiization of the army. Then in 47, the partition took place. And essentially, those were very nascent years of the Indian Republic, and their recruitment paradigms continued as before. In 1966, when Babu Jagjeevan Ram was the defense minister, he brought the recruitable male population policy, which essentially was that the proportion of recruitment per state into the Indian armed forces would depend upon their proportion in the population of India. But still certain regions, primarily because of martial traditions and otherwise, continued to contribute significantly to the armed forces, Punjab being one, Haryana being the other, Jammu Kashmir being the third, Uttarakhand being the fourth. So these states continued to have a very, very heavy recruitment footprint, which I hope even with the new paradigm would continue. Now, with this new paradigm coming into place, whereby you are going to take soldiers for a period of 4 years, essentially what this will do is that it will, over a 10-year horizon, bring the size of the Indian Army, which is the principal employer, or because the other two services are small, from about a current 14 lakhs to about 10 lakhs. And after year 4, about 2,000 odd people would retire between year 4 and 10 who are recruited as Agniveers or this Agnipaths or whatever you would like to call it. And so therefore, these people obviously have legitimate concerns about their future, and I can empathize with them completely. But then we have 10 central armed police forces. We have 36 state and union territory police forces. And essentially, if let's say 35,000 people have to be accommodated every year, they can easily be accommodated in these services. And these people can continue to have a permanent government job till the age of 58 or 60 years as opposed to the fact that if you look at the current recruitment paradigm, a person who's recruited as a sepoy at the age of 18 retires after 14 years at the age of about 32. So therefore, under those circumstances, I think a very balanced view of this entire process needs to be taken. And I'm quite surprised those people who are opposing a 4-year tour of duty, why didn't they oppose the 5-year short service commission? I remember when we were coming out of college, 5-year short service commission used to be very popular. A lot of my college mates went to the officers training academy in Chennai. Later on, it was increased to 10 years, but a lot of them transitioned out after 5 years into civilian jobs. So essentially, I think there's a communication failure on behalf of the government. They should have communicated things better, and they should have mandatorily built this transition path from the army or from the armed forces into the central armed police forces, the paramilitary forces, and the state polices before announcing this entire recruitment scheme.
To that limited extent, you do agree with the Congress when they said that it's, your spokespersons saying that it's not been well thought of. You could perhaps have gone with a pilot project instead of going straight ahead. And the third, your point about the short service scheme, a lot of people have come back on that, saying that currently what happens is there is no other recruitment, only these Agniveers. Earlier on, short service scheme was going on along with the other recruitment.
No, essentially, see, Agniveer has nothing to do with the Short Service Commission. Short Service Commission is for officers. So officers come into 3 streams. You join the National Defense Academy after +2, or you join the Indian Military Academy, or whatever are the concurrent academies of the Air Force and the Navy, or you go through the Short Service Commission route. And then, of course, you've got the technical services, the engineers, the doctors, etc., who have their own recruitment streams. So under those circumstances, insofar as the soldiery is concerned, right, earlier on you would recruit, and essentially that recruitment was limited to about 167 districts, because that's primarily from where the bulk of the recruitment would take place. And then they would come and serve for 14 years. And after 14 years, they would be transitioned out, and they had these Senate boards which were supposed to look after them, which never would do a good job. So therefore, as an MP representing a predominantly a rural constituency, I completely empathize and I completely sympathize with all these young people who have legitimate anxieties about their future, because, it's been suddenly sprung on them. You've been training for a particular career, you've been putting your heart and soul into it, and suddenly you realize that the entire playing field has been altered. Not only the goalpost, but the entire playing field has been changed. So I completely and absolutely understand that. That is why I'm saying that the Agniveer or the Agnipath scheme has to be dovetailed into a compulsory statutory transition path into the central armed police forces and the state police forces, so that these people can continue to have job security till the age of 58 or 60 years, or till whenever they are able to rise in those respective services.
The other criticism of the scheme, Manish, is that, yes, the advantage is you'll have a leaner, younger army, more technologically advanced, etc. But for instance, Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, he came on NewsX also. He says that don't undermine the use of hand-to-hand combat, especially in the wake of what happened in Galwan 2 years ago. So are we, decreasing the army at the cost of our national security?
Well, Priya, that's the subject of a larger debate, but I'm glad that you brought it up. You see, in the wake of the Vietnam War in 1975, especially in the United States of America, a thought process commenced that what should the future of the armed forces look like, given that the nature of warfare and the nature of the battlefield are going to completely transform themselves. And this thinking was led by Donald Rumsfeld, who was then Defense Secretary in the Ford administration. And therefore, he then put in place the building blocks of how the transition is going to take place to a leaner, more mobile, expeditionary force. And this template was in fact picked up by services across the world. The People's Liberation Army, which was the largest army in the world, actually started right-sizing from 1985 onwards. And over a period of time, they have shed a large number of their soldiers. In fact, currently, they are in the process of bringing down their armed forces from 2 million to 1 million. That's 20 lakhs to 10 lakhs. Number two, what we need to keep in mind is that in India, especially post the implementation of the one rank, one pension, for every 1 rupee that you spend on defense, 25 paisa goes towards pensions. Defense pensions constitute 64% of the central government pension liability across the board. Now, and then if you also take salaries into account, that hardly leaves any money for defense modernization or capital acquisitions. And look, the nature of the battlefield has completely transformed itself. You are going to actually be fighting in an informationized environment whereby there could be a contactless war. You would have drones, you would have artificial intelligence, robotics, cyber attacks. The whole domain of warfare has changed. You see, Galwan was an aberration whereby you actually came down to a medieval hand-to-hand combat. And of course, our boys got better of the Chinese, irrespective of the fact whether the Chinese are willing to admit it or not. But that's a one-off. That cannot really define as to how the future battlefield is going to be. So in the interest of a leaner force, in the interest of looking at the strategic horizon and then making the human resource changes which are required, in my humble estimation, if the government would have built in these career paths, they would not have the kind of situation on their hands which they have today.
Yeah, because today, anyways, you see a Niti Aayog chairperson saying that engineers, 48% of graduates are not getting jobs. There is already a joblessness situation prevailing, and then you're unleashing into the same atmosphere trained, military capable youth who are, also going to be looking for jobs and adding to the job market.
You see, that's exactly what I'm saying, that job creation, unfortunately, has been the biggest failure of this government in the past 8 years. Undoubtedly, even before COVID-19 happened, their management of the economy was abysmal, to say the least. But however, I would very respectfully like to submit that the armed forces of the Union are not an employment guarantee program. The armed forces of the Union perform a specific function, that is to uphold the sovereignty and integrity of the nation. And if the entire nature of warfare, if the entire structure of the battlefield is changing and transforming itself, is it not really prudent to keep up with the times? Even in Pakistan, which continues to be our principal land adversary, this all-class recruitment, which is now a part of the Agnipath paradigm, whatever you would like to call it, was something which they had commenced way back in the 60s itself. So I think prudence requires that we should not indulge in opposition for the sake of opposition. Yes, there are glitches with this scheme. There is fine-tuning required. And those tweaks should be made as early as possible so that people have a fair idea of how stable the career path is going to be. And then last of all, we are not a conscript army, right? We are a voluntary army. People volunteer to join the armed forces. If you do not like a particular situation, or you don't like a particular job avenue, there is no compulsion to opt for it.
I'm going to take a break and I'm going to come back and ask Manish a couple of more questions on this new Agniveer scheme and also the buzz on the presidential elections. Why isn't the opposition able to get a candidate? I mean, there's this round of musical chairs where everybody is saying no. Usually everybody is rushing for the gaddi, but what is happening? So after a quick break. Manish, on the Agniveer scheme, you were just discussing, but the complaint of the Congress and rest of the opposition is that maybe it's a good scheme, but badly implemented. Again, no stakeholder was taken into account. It was just sprung onto everybody like the rest of their schemes. There was no parliamentary standing committee, no consultations, at least not in the public domain.
Well, to that extent, the criticism is absolutely correct. Wider consultation, more confabulations, far more structured discussions between those parliamentary committees which have superintendence over the Ministry of Defense is very much required. But if I go by what is available in the public space, and since I follow strategic affairs rather closely, this discussion has now been going on all the way back to 1999. In fact, the Kargil Review Committee, recommended that we should have a leaner armed forces. The age profile of the armed forces needs to be brought down. It was endorsed by the group of ministers. Subsequently, when the Naresh Chandra Committee was constituted in the first decade of the 21st century, they also looked at some of those recommendations. So therefore, this is not something which is new. This is a discussion which has been in the works since 1999, but possibly in the sense if there would have been a more profiled discussion about it, maybe some of the opposition or the pushback which the government is facing now may not have been there.
So those who say, after hearing your arguments, it's again very well reasoned and rational. In fact, should have added also, you're an expert on national security affairs. You've written recently a book also on that. So your position comes from a certain position, well thought out, well researched. How do you see your stand versus the Congress, and what do you tell those people who say that Manish is disagreeing with the Congress, or is he on his way out? Are you at war with the odds with the Congress rather than anything else?
Well, every time we have this conversation, that is one question which you always ask me, and I still continue to be where I am. Look, in my calculus, national security and politics fall into two different buckets. And when I think about national security, I do not think wearing my political hat. I try and think about national security as objectively and as as a non-partisan manner as possible. And so therefore, when I studied the scheme and when I knew about the conversations which had been taking place, I was also aware of how different militaries across the world have transited to a very, very light footprint on the ground. In fact, most modern militaries have restructured themselves. I could understand, the uproar in Telangana or in Bihar, because obviously, if you've been preparing for a particular career and suddenly you find the carpet being pulled from under your feet, you would definitely feel very disappointed. But then again, to be resorting to violence, to be burning trains and burning government property, I wonder, is this the kind of soldierly that we really want? Do we really want such people in our armed forces? So therefore, there is no situation gives you a license for lumpenism.
You see them taking a rollback. Maybe they've taken, for like the farm laws, because maybe that's I'm not saying lumpenism the inspiration, but the protest is definitely an inspiration from the farm law.
Well, that's the government's call. In the sense, if they feel that they've been hasty about it, or they have not been able to communicate it better, that's entirely their call whether they want to go ahead or take it back. But as a reform measure, especially when you talk about defense reforms, as I've earlier pointed out, this is a prudent, pragmatic course which actually has been following the path globally which most armed forces have taken.
Just moving on from this, Manish, to another issue, the current buzz on the presidential election. So now let's talk politics. What is happening with the opposition? Why can't the opposition get together and, at least for the sake of, a fight, put up a candidate?
No, I completely and absolutely agree with you. I think the opposition needs to find a candidate who will have resonance not only in the presidential elections, but beyond that for 2024 also. And I'm quite struck by the fact that unlike 2017, when things were far more proactive, there seems to be a more laid back or a more nuanced approach. But it is early days as yet. You see, government has also not declared a candidate. I believe as we are talking, the opposition leaders may be meeting to finalize a candidate. And therefore, under those circumstances, I think the opposition will have a joint candidate and it will be a good fight.
But already the first three names have said no. So that itself shows that now you're just going towards whoever is ready to be the sacrificial lamb.
Well, that's not really true, you see, because people could have their own imperatives. Mr. Sharad Pawar is a very tall leader. He's been around for a very, very long time. He could have had his own calculations. Dr. Farooq Abdullah, of course, has been Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, again, a very respected leader. And as he pointed out, that Jammu Kashmir has been through a very turbulent phase and maybe heading into an elections, and that's where he would like to be focused. Similarly, insofar as Mr. Gopal Gandhi is concerned, he was the vice presidential candidate this time. He may have again had his own reasons. So therefore, under those circumstances, I don't think that if three people have declined, it really should be construed that the opposition is not able to find a candidate. I'm sure that they will come together. They'll be able to find a candidate who will be able to give a good fight.
But you see this opposition with Mamata Banerjee, Sharad Pawar taking the lead more than I know the Congress is occupied otherwise, either with Sonia Gandhi's health or with the ED. But the Congress is losing its grip as the mover and shaker in the opposition camp.
Well, ultimately, I think you have to adjust to new realities. And as you go into 2024, what the opposition needs to keep in mind is that there is no first among equals any longer. And if the opposition has to give a concerted fight to the NDA BJP government, then obviously it will have to be done in synchronization, in coordination with everybody. And that coordination will have to be seamless and across the board. And I think Mr. Mallikarjun Kharge, to his credit, has taken a very pragmatic stand in the presidential negotiations that, we are not, looking to lead this process, but we would definitely, play our role as a catalyst wherever it is required. And that's a very pragmatic position.
Mature position also. But lastly, before I let you go, Manish, I was going through your Twitter timeline and you had a very interesting tweet a couple of days ago on the Rajsabha. You had said that, was it just in jest? Are you serious at the idea of let's just do away with the Rajsabha?
Look, I have got a lot of flack from my Rajsabha colleagues
I'm sure.
for even having written that Indian Express piece.
But I can't say Saag rapes because you are a Lok Sabha MP, so you're not interested.
But I do feel that some of the concerns which had been articulated by the members of the Constituent Assembly, those concerns remain valid 70 years later. And maybe the time has come to look at a paradigm shift in the manner in which the Rajya Sabha is constituted. Because after all, if it is the Council of States, then why should it not be modeled on the lines of the US Senate, where two people, irrespective of the size of the state, are elected from each state, and eventually the Council of States becomes truly representative of the will of the people or the states which constitute the Union of India by these Rajya Sabha members being directly elected by the people. I think that's an idea whose time has come.
Well, then where will all the fun be? We just the media.
So when you go to the people, right, and you ask the people for their mandate, you will obviously be able to get the finances from the people who support you. After all, elections around the world are crowd-funded. And as I'm saying, that if you want a truly representative Council of States, and if India is a union of states, looking at Article 1 of the Constitution, then the Council of States should represent this federal character in its purest form. I mean, we can have a longer discussion on this.
Done. And a discussion hopefully soon on the politics of Punjab. You have a very exciting by-election coming up. Everybody's watching that to see which way the wind will blow.
Everybody is watching that very, very carefully for various reasons.
On that very enigmatic note, I will leave you. Thank you so much, Manish Tiwari, for this conversation and also for explaining the Agnipath scheme. I think explained it pretty well, the pros and cons of that. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.